Okay, we're going to make a few brief remarks on key points in the Jean-Paul Sartre reading. Now, the Sartre chapter contains excerpts from a famous lecture that Sartre gave in 1945 in Paris. And the lecture's main goal is to provide a coherent atheist position. And he begins by explaining one of the chief arguments or components of his brand of existentialism, which is the concept that existence precedes essence, which my students tend to find a little confusing at first, but once you think about it and read what he has to say about it, it starts to make a lot of sense. So he begins by using an example to illustrate what it means when he says existence precedes essence. So take any man-made object. He uses the example of a book or a paper cutter. I prefer the example of a cell phone. Let's use the example of a cell phone. So here's an object that started out as an idea, as a concept in the mind of the person who designed and constructed it. So let's say you have a cell phone. Let's say it was designed by a team of engineers. Let's just assume, to make things easier, that it was designed by one engineer. Okay, and that the engineer designed the actual phone. He or she came up with all of the functions it was going to have. Came up with the purpose for which it was going to be made, which is to, make phone calls and to surf the web and use any number of different apps and play games and whatnot. And then got the physical components and put them together to build the cell phone. So notice that in this example, the concept or the idea of the cell phone comes first, right? It starts off in the mind of the engineer, of the designer. And the physical existence of the cell phone comes second, comes later, right? So the idea of the cell phone would be the essence. And the essence encompasses the purpose for which the cell phone is to exist. It encompasses all the design properties and functions of the cell phone. And the existence which comes after would be the physical being, the physical creation of the cell phone. So this is what it means to say that essence precedes existence. This is the traditional view, by the way. So if you look at the world in a technical view, as an act of creation, the essence of the object precedes or comes before the actual physical existence of the object, right? Now let's use this same line of thought to look at the Christian understanding of creation. When we conceive God as the creator, he is thought of as a kind of superhuman engineer or designer or artisan. So if you know your Genesis, God creates the earth and then the human species according to a deliberate plan or concept or idea. Okay, so the concept comes first, and then the execution of the plan, the physical creation act, comes second. So the concept of mankind and God's intelligence is what we refer to as human nature. It defines the human being in terms of what we are and how we are meant to live. Let me give you an example. If you look at the natural law theory of St. Thomas Aquinas, you'll see exactly what I'm referring to, what Sartre is referring to, right? According to St. Thomas, in his natural law teaching, God designs us as human beings. He designs us and implants those four natural inclinations in us. And it is by way of living in accordance with those four natural God-given inclinations that we live We live in a manner consistent with our nature, and we live in a manner that is pleasing to God. Well, that's what Sartre is referring to, that in the traditional view, essence comes first and existence comes later. But Sartre, who's an atheist, completely disagrees with this vision. So if God does not exist, then we cannot be said to have our essence first and our existence later, because there is no creator God to conceive of our essence and then create us afterwards. For Sartre, for the atheist Sartre, man first of all exists and only afterwards defines himself or gives himself an essence. Since there is no God who conceives the concept of man and then creates mankind according to that idea or concept, there is no such thing as human nature, as a fixed or a given human nature. Right? So there's no answer to the question, why are we here? There is no satisfying answer to many of us, in the sense that, well, you are created to live on this earth and to obey God and be saved. That answer is not satisfactory to Sartre. The only thing you can say is that we simply turn up, we simply exist. There is no why. We're just here. There's no God who created us. We simply exist. And only after we are thrown into this world do we create our own essence for ourselves through our freely chosen actions. So the first principle of existentialism is that the human being is nothing else but what he makes of himself. This is what Sartre refers to as subjectivity. So the human being creates his own essence or nature through our chosen acts, since there is no fixed or given human nature that we are supposed to follow or that defines us in any way. So we are like a blank canvas. When we're born into this world, we are a blank canvas, and our actions are the brush strokes on that canvas. And our life, taken as a whole, is the self-portrait that we have created through our freely chosen actions. And that self-portrait constitutes our essence, the essence that we have given ourselves through the exercise of our freedom. So again, existence precedes essence is the atheistic response to the traditional view of essence precedes existence. God is out of the picture, therefore there's no act of creation. There is no human nature that is fixed, that is determined, that is given to us by the supernatural God. And therefore we are blank slates that are free to define ourselves based on how we choose to live. Now, there is a dark side to this. There is the overwhelming feeling of responsibility, according to Sartre, that we will necessarily have to grapple with as existentialists. The responsibility for all men. For Sartre says, in making the man that we want to be, we at the same time create an image of what we think mankind ought to be. To put it another way, when we are at the crossroads and we have to make an important life decision and we have two choices and we have to pick one, what we implicitly do when we choose one option over the other is to project an image for all mankind that basically says that everyone in their right mind ought to act as I am acting now. Sartre saying that we are implicitly doing that, and that creates a very burdensome feeling of total responsibility for all human beings. So anguish is the emotion or passion that characterizes this feeling, or that describes or defines this feeling of total responsibility. Since in choosing to live as we do, we are choosing all mankind, he says. Our actions are those of a lawmaker. to whom everything happens as if the whole world had its eyes fixed on him and were guiding itself by his actions. So Sartre argues that a sincere and conscientious atheist existentialist will feel the weight of this anguish, of this burden of responsibility on his shoulders every time he makes a fundamental life choice, because it will be as if he were implicating all of mankind in his choice by saying that this choice of mine represents how human beings ought to live. And if I happen to be mistaken, if I happen to be choosing something that's going to be bad for me in the long term, then I am also going to bring down humanity with me. And that possibility of failure creates a sense of anguish. It's a strange concept, I know. Forlornness is a much easier one to make sense of. So Sartre recognizes, and I think he's right on this, that once you recognize or once you believe that God does not exist, that you are left with this sense of emptiness, this sense of having been abandoned. Because without God, right, there's no eternal or transcendent standard of good or justice or beauty. There is no summum bonum or highest good, to invoke St. Thomas Aquinas. There's no possibility of salvation. There is no moral compass that is eternal, right? That is not man-made. And that awareness, facing up to that ugly truth, creates a sense of abandonment or forlornness. And Sartre is very critical of atheists who think you can just get rid of God and still maintain some kind of ethical standard that is somehow transcendent or eternal. He thinks that you cannot have it both ways. If you give up God, if you abandon God, if you become an atheist, then you have to face up to the ugly consequence that you also give up the possibility of a transcendent, eternal, and fixed standard of right and wrong or good and bad and so forth. And that is a terrible prospect. All right. So if God does not exist, Sartre argues, then nothing is true and everything is permitted. Now, what does he mean by that? There are no moral truths in the sense that murder is always wrong, or infidelity is always wrong, or hurting innocent people is always wrong. Those rules have no meaning in a godless universe, right? There are no 10 commandments anymore because there is no God to create them and to uphold them. So morality becomes purely conventional or man-made, right? There would be no natural, no divine law, no eternal law to define and to punish evildoers. In that sense, there are no moral truths and everything is permitted from the point of view of the universe. Now, if you commit homicide, you could get arrested and put on trial and get convicted and sentenced to life in prison. In that sense, not everything is permitted. So you would be punished from the civil authorities, but you wouldn't be punished by God, which is the ultimate punishment, because there is no God, according to Sartre. But imagine if you could commit murder and get away with it. Let's say that the cops pick up the wrong person, and through a glitch in the judicial system, that innocent person gets sentenced and convicted and put away for life or put to death. In that scenario, you would have gotten away with murder and you would not have to pay any other penalty because there is no God to punish you in the next life. So what Sartre means is that from the point of view of the universe, right, there is no standard for morality. Nothing is true. There are no moral truths about right and wrong. And everything is therefore permitted. So from the point of view of the godless, empty, meaningless cosmos, killing a human being does not have any significance. It is no more significant than the killing of an insect. And for Sartre, that is, again, a very terrifying and disquieting realization. So atheism is not a hunky-dory. It's not easy. It is not a sunny worldview that just lets you do what you want without being judged. It's actually a very terrifying worldview, and we need to face up to that. So again, for Sartre, as an atheist, we are utterly alone in the universe. There is no natural or supernatural standard by which we can live our lives. There is no moral compass, right? This should remind you of Nietzsche's Madman and the Death of God. Nietzsche correctly saw the tragic and terrifying consequences of atheism. And we arrive finally at Sartre's analysis of despair. Despair results from our awareness that there are a multitude of factors in life that are utterly beyond our control. That although we are free to a great extent, there are severe limitations placed on our freedom. For example, I'm not free to determine who my parents are, or what my IQ is, or what century I'm born into, or what country I'm born into, right? There are limitations placed on our freedoms. We have to do what we can with what the circumstances allow us to do. We have to decide with a view to probabilities. So no matter how well you plan out your life, no matter how detailed your plan is, we always have to be aware that there are contingencies that we cannot influence. And this is what it means when Descartes says that we must conquer ourselves rather than the world. In other words, the rational way of viewing life is that you have to accommodate yourself to the world, accommodate your will, your desires, your plans to what circumstances allow, rather than expecting the world to bend to your will. This is a very, very insightful understanding of how to live. I think this is a key insight that will help you live a better life, and it'll help you avoid a lot of unnecessary disappointments. To adapt your will to the world, to what the world will allow, rather than expecting the world to bend to your will. Thus, to sum up Sartre's vision of the human being, man is nothing else than the sum total of his freely chosen actions. He exists only insofar as he fulfills himself. Your nature as a human being, your essence, according to Sartre, is nothing else but your autobiography, your actions. Thank you for listening.